The courthouse in Millfield was nothing special from the outside. Just another brick building with large columns and concrete steps leading to heavy wooden doors. But inside those walls, unexpected moments sometimes unfolded that changed people's perspectives forever. Officer Richard Taylor stood tall in his crisp blue uniform, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. With 23 years on the force and a reputation for being strict, he commanded respect wherever he went. His colleagues knew him as a man who followed the rules to the letter, someone who believed the law was black and white with no room for gray areas. That morning, the courtroom buzzed with the usual activity. The judge hadn't arrived yet, and the court clerk shuffled papers while lawyers huddled with their clients in hushed conversations. Officer Taylor sat confidently at the prosecution table, reviewing his notes for the traffic violation case he was about to present. When the side door opened, a man in a simple button-down shirt and slacks walked in. Thomas Johnson moved quietly, finding a seat in the back row. His eyes scanned the room carefully, taking in every detail with a calm that came from years of observation. At 45, Thomas had experienced enough in life to know how to navigate difficult situations, especially ones like this. 3 months ago, Thomas had been driving home after a late shift at the community center where he volunteered teaching computer skills to underprivileged youth. It was past midnight when flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Officer Taylor had pulled him over, claiming he'd run a stop sign. "I came to a complete stop, officer," Thomas had explained politely. Officer Taylor had shone his flashlight directly into Thomas's face. "Don't tell me how to do my job. I saw what I saw." What should have been a routine traffic stop turned uncomfortable quickly. The officer's tone changed when he saw Thomas's address on his license, from the east side of town where many black families lived. "You people never want to admit when you break the law," Officer Taylor had muttered, loud enough for Thomas to hear. Thomas had remained composed, knowing from experience that arguing would only make things worse. He accepted the ticket with a "thank you, sir," which seemed to irritate the officer even more. Now, sitting in the courtroom waiting for his case to be called, Thomas felt a mixture of emotions. He wasn't just fighting a traffic ticket anymore, he was standing up against something much bigger. "All rise." The bailiff's voice rang out as Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom. The morning proceeded with the usual parade of traffic violations, minor disputes, and scheduling for bigger cases. Thomas observed Officer Taylor's demeanor change with each person who approached the stand. The officer was formal but respectful with some defendants, yet noticeably colder with others, particularly people of color. Finally, the clerk called out, "Case number 47293, Township vs. Thomas Johnson, traffic violation." Thomas rose and walked confidently to the front of the courtroom. Officer Taylor glanced up, recognition flashing across his face, followed by a subtle smirk. Judge Williams looked at the paperwork. "Mr. Johnson, you're contesting a ticket for running a stop sign on Oak Street on March 12. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Thomas replied clearly. Officer Taylor stood to present his case. "Your Honor, on the night in question, I observed the defendant's vehicle roll through the stop sign at Oak and Pine. When I initiated the traffic stop, the defendant was argumentative and disrespectful." Thomas blinked in surprise at the blatant lie but remained silent. The officer continued, his voice growing louder. "This is a clear-cut case. The defendant disobeyed a traffic law and now refuses to take responsibility." Judge Williams turned to Thomas. "Mr. Johnson, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Thomas nodded respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor. I did come to a complete stop at that intersection. I always do because it's near a playground. As for being disrespectful, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. I remained polite throughout our interaction." Officer Taylor scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, if I may. We see this all the time from these people. They break the law, then claim innocence. The judge frowned slightly. These people, Officer Taylor? Individuals from that part of town, the officer clarified, though everyone in the courtroom understood the implication. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking again. Your Honor, I believe there's another element at play here. I've installed a dashboard camera in my car for situations exactly like this one. Officer Taylor's confident expression faltered for the first time. I have the footage showing my vehicle coming to a complete stop, as well as the entire interaction with Officer Taylor, Thomas continued. I'd like to submit this as evidence. The judge nodded, and Thomas handed a USB drive to the clerk. As the courtroom waited for the technical setup, Officer Taylor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as the clerk connected the drive to a computer linked to the courtroom's display screen. Thomas stood calmly, his hands clasped before him, while Officer Taylor's face gradually reddened. With all due respect, Your Honor, Officer Taylor interrupted, we shouldn't need to waste the court's time with this. It's a simple traffic violation. I'd like to see the evidence, Officer, Judge Williams replied firmly. As the video began to play, the courtroom fell completely silent. The footage clearly showed Thomas's car coming to a full stop before proceeding through the intersection. Then came the flashing lights, the officer approaching, and the entire interaction, including Officer Taylor's inappropriate comments. Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly concerned as she watched. When the video ended, she took off her glasses and looked directly at Officer Taylor. Officer, would you like to revise your statement to the court? The officer's face had turned a deep shade of red. Your Honor, I may have misremembered certain details. It appears you've done more than misremember, the judge cut in. Case dismissed, Mr. Johnson. Thomas nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. As Thomas turned to leave, Officer Taylor spoke up again, his voice laced with frustration. Just doing my job, Your Honor. You can't blame me for keeping an eye on certain neighborhoods. The judge's gavel came down hard. Officer Taylor approached the bench. Thomas paused by the courtroom door, watching as the officer reluctantly stepped forward. Little did Officer Taylor know, Thomas Johnson was much more than just another defendant from that part of town. And tomorrow, when he returned to court, the truth about his identity would change everything. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Officer Richard Taylor felt anything but sunny as he drove to the courthouse. The events from yesterday had kept him awake most of the night. He'd been on the force for over 2 decades, and never had he been called out so publicly. The dashboard camera footage had caught him red-handed, not just making a mistake but showing clear bias. Still, he told himself, it was just a traffic ticket. A slap on the wrist was the worst he'd face. He couldn't have been more wrong. When Officer Taylor arrived at the courthouse, he was immediately directed to courtroom 3 instead of his usual traffic court assignment. His stomach tightened as he walked down the marble hallway. Something wasn't right. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors to find a much larger courtroom than yesterday's. This one was nearly full, with reporters sitting in the back row and several high-ranking police department officials in attendance. His police chief, Robert Henderson, sat stone-faced in the front row. What's going on? He asked another officer near the door. You don't know? The officer raised his eyebrows. That man from yesterday, Thomas Johnson? Turns out he's the new federal oversight inspector for our district. He was conducting an unofficial review of police practices when you pulled him over. The blood drained from Officer Taylor's face. Federal Oversight Inspector? The position had been created 6 months ago after several complaints about discriminatory policing practices in their county. The Oversight Committee had power to recommend department-wide reforms and even individual officer dismissals. And Taylor had given him a front-row demonstration of exactly the kind of behavior they were investigating. Judge Williams entered, and everyone rose. Once seated, she looked directly at Officer Taylor. Officer Taylor, please approach the bench." As Taylor walked forward on legs that felt like lead, he noticed Thomas Johnson sitting quietly at a side table. Unlike yesterday, today he wore a tailored suit and had a briefcase open in front of him filled with organized documents. Thomas didn't look triumphant or smug, just focused and prepared. "Officer Taylor," Judge Williams began, "yesterday's incident has raised serious concerns. Mr. Johnson was not just any citizen you pulled over. For the past 3 months, he's been conducting an unofficial review of police interactions in our county as part of his role as federal oversight inspector." The judge continued, "Your conduct was recorded not just on Mr. Johnson's dashboard camera but also on a body camera he was authorized to wear. This footage has been submitted to the review board." Taylor's mouth went dry. "Your Honor, I had no idea." "That's precisely the point, officer," Judge Williams interrupted. "You shouldn't treat any citizen differently based on who you think they are or where they live." Thomas Johnson stood up. When he spoke, his voice was measured and calm. "Your Honor, if I may. I want to clarify that my identity shouldn't matter. I wasn't treated disrespectfully because Officer Taylor failed to recognize me as a federal inspector. I was treated that way because of assumptions made about me based on my appearance and address." Thomas turned slightly to address Taylor directly. "Officer, I've been reviewing hundreds of traffic stops in this county. Your interaction with me fits a pattern we've documented across multiple officers. It's not just about one ticket or one stop, it's about a system that allows these behaviors to continue unchecked." Officer Taylor's face burned with shame and anger. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the evidence was undeniable. Chief Henderson stood up. "Your Honor, the department takes these allegations very seriously. We request time to conduct a thorough internal review." Thomas shook his head. "With all due respect, Chief, internal reviews have proven ineffective. That's why the federal oversight position was created. My team has been gathering evidence for months, and Officer Taylor's conduct yesterday provides clear documentation of the issues we've been investigating." From his briefcase, Thomas withdrew a thick folder. "This contains records of traffic stops in this county over the past year, broken down by race, location, and outcome. The statistical pattern is impossible to ignore." He handed copies to the judge, the chief, and slid one across to Officer Taylor. "Page 17 shows your personal statistics, officer. You're 3 times more likely to issue citations to people of color than white drivers for the exact same violations." Officer Taylor stared at the numbers in disbelief. He'd never thought of himself as racist. He'd just been doing his job, focusing on neighborhoods with higher crime rates. But the data told a different story, one he couldn't deny when faced with the cold, hard facts. Judge Williams reviewed the documents with a grim expression. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I expect representatives from the department to be prepared to discuss immediate remedial actions." As everyone rose, Thomas approached Officer Taylor. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes on this unexpected confrontation. "Officer," Thomas said quietly, "this isn't about punishing you. It's about fixing a broken system. I hope you'll be part of the solution." With those words hanging in the air, Thomas walked out, leaving Officer Taylor facing the most important decision of his career. During the recess, Officer Taylor found himself alone in a small conference room, staring at the statistics in front of him. 23 years on the force, and he'd never once thought of himself as biased. He'd grown up in a working-class family, worked hard for everything he had, and always believed he treated everyone fairly. But the numbers told a different story. Black drivers were more likely to be pulled over, more likely to be ticketed rather than warned, more likely to have their vehicles searched. And his own record was worse than the department average. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Chief Henderson entered, his face grim. "Taylor, I've been looking at these reports. This isn't good for any of us." The chief took a seat across from him. The department can fight this, but the evidence is strong. We need to decide how to respond. Taylor looked up. Chief, these numbers. I never realized. None of us did. Or maybe we didn't want to, the chief admitted. But now we have to face it. The door opened again, and Thomas Johnson stepped in. May I join you, gentlemen? The chief nodded, and Thomas sat down, placing his briefcase on the table. I want to be clear about something, Thomas began. My job isn't to assign blame or get officers fired. It's to identify problems and help fix them. What I saw yesterday was a symptom of a larger issue. So what happens now? Taylor asked, finding his voice. Am I supposed to just turn in my badge? Thomas shook his head. Actually, I'm proposing something different. Officer Taylor, your record shows you're a dedicated policeman with an otherwise clean history. What if instead of punishment, we focus on transformation? He opened his briefcase and pulled out another folder. I've developed a program that's been successful in 3 other districts. It pairs officers who show these patterns with community leaders for joint patrols and community engagement. It includes bias training, but goes beyond that to build real relationships. Taylor frowned. You want me to be some kind of poster boy for reformed racist cops? No, Thomas replied firmly. I want you to be a leader. The officers who have the courage to acknowledge their biases and work to change them are the ones who can help transform entire departments. The chief leaned forward. What kind of results have you seen elsewhere? Dramatic improvements in community trust. Reduction in use of force incidents. Better crime-solving rates because witnesses are more willing to come forward. Thomas slid the proposal across the table. But it only works if the officers are genuinely committed. Taylor looked down at the papers, then back at Thomas. Why me? After how I treated you, why not just have me fired? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Because 20 years ago, I was arrested by an officer not unlike yourself. He assumed I was a drug dealer because I was a black man driving a nice car. That arrest could have ruined my life. What happened? Taylor asked. Another officer stepped in. Recognized the bias, fought for me. He became my mentor, encouraged me to go into public service. That's why I do this work. Thomas's eyes met Taylor's. One officer can make a difference, for better or worse. Taylor felt something shift inside him. All his defensiveness began to crumble under the weight of a simple truth. He had been wrong, not just about Thomas, but about many of the people he'd sworn to protect and serve. The court will reconvene in 5 minutes, the bailiff announced from the doorway. Taylor looked at the chief, then at Thomas. I need to decide what kind of officer, what kind of man, I want to be. As they walked back toward the courtroom, Taylor made his decision. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Williams returned to the bench. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Officer Taylor stood at attention, his posture rigid but his eyes showing a new awareness that hadn't been there before. Before the court proceeds, Judge Williams began, I understand there have been discussions during the recess. Does anyone wish to address the court? Taylor took a step forward. Your Honor, I would like to speak. The judge nodded, and all eyes turned to Taylor. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, I've reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Johnson. The statistics don't lie. His voice wavered slightly before he steadied himself. I've served this community for 23 years believing I was doing what was right. But today I've been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. My actions have hurt the very people I swore to protect. Murmurs filled the courtroom. This kind of admission from a police officer was rare. I don't stand here to make excuses. The fact is, I've been enforcing the law differently based on zip codes and skin color. I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it. Thomas Johnson watched quietly from his seat, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Johnson has proposed a community engagement program, Taylor continued. With the court's permission and my department's approval, I would like to volunteer to be part of this initiative. Not as punishment, but as a commitment to do better. Chief Henderson stood. Your Honor, the department supports this proposal. We recognize the need for structural changes, and we believe Officer Taylor's participation could help lead the way for others. Judge Williams turned to Thomas. Mr. Johnson, as the Federal Oversight Inspector, what are your thoughts? Thomas approached the bench. Your Honor, Officer Taylor's willingness to acknowledge his bias is an important first step. The program I've outlined requires a 6-month commitment, including community patrols paired with local leaders, regular bias training, and monthly progress reviews with my office. He turned to face Taylor. It won't be easy. You'll face skepticism from the community and possibly resistance from fellow officers. Are you prepared for that? Taylor nodded firmly. Yes, sir. I am. Judge Williams considered for a moment. Very well. Officer Taylor, you will participate in Mr. Johnson's program for the next 6 months. You'll be reassigned from your current duties during this period, and your progress will be reviewed by this court quarterly. She addressed the entire courtroom. Let it be known that this court takes allegations of discriminatory policing extremely seriously. However, we also believe in the possibility of change. This case will remain open pending Officer Taylor's progress and department-wide reforms. As the judge's gavel came down, a reporter slipped out of the courtroom. By evening, the story would be headline news: Officer admits bias in court, joins reform program. In the hallway outside, Thomas approached Taylor. That couldn't have been easy. Taylor shook his head. Easiest thing would have been to deny everything and fight it. But it wouldn't have been right. The hard part starts tomorrow, Thomas said. I know, Taylor replied. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. Little did either man know just how challenging the road ahead would be. 2 weeks into the program, Officer Taylor sat in his patrol car outside the East Side Community Center, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Today would be his first community patrol with Darnell Washington, a respected neighborhood organizer who'd lived in the area for over 30 years. The news coverage of his court appearance had been intense. Some outlets painted him as a villain, others as a potential hero in the making. Fellow officers were split, some avoided him in the hallways, others quietly expressed support for his honesty. The most difficult conversation had been with his wife and teenage son, explaining why their family name was suddenly all over the local news. A knock on the window startled him. Darnell Washington stood there, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to see right through Taylor's uniform. Officer Taylor, Darnell said as Taylor stepped out of the car. Ready for today? Taylor nodded, though his stomach was in knots. As ready as I'll ever be. Good. We'll start by walking. No car. I want you to see the neighborhood at ground level. For the next 3 hours, Taylor walked beside Darnell through streets he'd only ever patrolled in his vehicle. They stopped at small businesses where Darnell introduced him not as a police officer under scrutiny, but simply as Richard, who's working with me to improve community relations. At a local barbershop, the atmosphere chilled when Taylor walked in. Conversation stopped, and eyes followed him warily. This is Bobby's shop, Darnell explained. 3 generations of family have come here. It's more than a business, it's a community hub. The owner, an older man with steady hands and a skeptical expression, nodded at Darnell but barely acknowledged Taylor. Bobby's son was pulled over 4 times last month, Darnell said quietly. Clean record, honor roll student. No citations issued, but each time, he was made to feel like a criminal. Taylor felt a familiar defensiveness rising. We patrol high-crime areas more heavily. That's just good policing. Darnell's expression didn't change. Is it? Or does heavy policing create the impression of high crime? When you're looking harder in one place than another, what do you find? Before Taylor could respond, a young man entered the shop. He froze when he saw Taylor's uniform. "Kevin," Darnell called. "Come meet Officer Taylor. He's part of that new program I told you about." Kevin approached cautiously. Taylor recognized him immediately. He'd stopped the young man about a month ago for a broken taillight. The interaction had been tense. "We've met," Kevin said coolly. Taylor cleared his throat. "I remember. I gave you a citation for that taillight." "Yeah, and made me late for my college interview." Kevin's voice was controlled but carried an unmistakable edge. "Had to reschedule, nearly lost my shot at a scholarship." The barbershop fell silent. This wasn't just a statistic anymore, this was a real person whose life had been affected by Taylor's actions. "I'm sorry," Taylor said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Kevin replied simply. As they left the barbershop, Taylor walked in silence, his mind racing. This was only day one, and already the comfortable barriers between officer and civilian were crumbling. "Hard day," Darnell observed. "Tomorrow will be harder." "You ready for that?" Taylor took a deep breath. "I need to be." 1 month into the program, Officer Taylor sat across from Thomas Johnson in the federal inspector's temporary office. Between them lay a folder containing Taylor's progress reports. "Your community hours are impressive," Thomas noted, flipping through the documents. "Darnell says you haven't missed a single patrol." Taylor nodded. "It's been educational. That's one word for it." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "I've also received feedback from community members. Mixed reviews, as expected, but trending positive." The past month had been the most challenging of Taylor's career. He'd walked the streets with Darnell, attended community meetings where residents openly shared their negative experiences with police, and spent time at the youth center helping with after-school programs. Each day brought new revelations about how his actions, and those of the department, had affected real people. "I've been thinking about something," Taylor said. "The traffic stops. We target certain neighborhoods because that's what we're told to do. It comes from the top." Thomas's expression remained neutral. And I'm wondering how much change I can really make as just one officer." Thomas slid another folder across the desk. "That's why I wanted to meet today. Chief Henderson has agreed to a department-wide review of policing practices. He wants you to be part of the committee." Taylor's eyebrows shot up. "Me? Why?" "Because you've seen both sides now. You understand the department's perspective, but you're also beginning to see through the community's eyes." Taylor opened the folder and scanned the proposal. "Some of the officers won't like this. Changing patrol patterns, requiring body cameras for all interactions, community review boards. Change isn't supposed to be comfortable," Thomas replied. "The question is whether it's necessary." Before Taylor could respond, his phone buzzed. A text message from Darnell: "Need you at the center ASAP. Situation with Kevin." Taylor stood up immediately. "I have to go. Something's happening at the community center." Thomas nodded. "Go. We'll continue this later." 20 minutes later, Taylor rushed into the youth center to find a tense standoff. Kevin, the young man from the barbershop, was being questioned by 2 patrol officers. A small crowd had gathered, including Darnell, who looked relieved when he spotted Taylor. "What's going on?" Taylor asked, approaching his fellow officers. "Got a call about suspicious activity," one officer explained. This guy matches the description. Kevin stood with his hands visible, jaw clenched. I work here. I was bringing in supplies for the computer lab. Taylor recognized the situation immediately. It was exactly the kind of interaction he would have handled the same way just a month ago. Vague call, quick profiling, escalating tension. Officers, I know this young man, Taylor said firmly. He's a volunteer here and a college student. The officers exchanged glances. You sure about that, Taylor? Heard you've gone soft on this beat. The comment stung, but Taylor held his ground. I'm sure. And I'm also sure we need to be more careful about how these calls are handled. As the officers reluctantly backed down, Kevin gave Taylor a barely perceptible nod, not quite thanks, but acknowledgement. Darnell approached as the crowd dispersed. That could have gone very differently. It usually does, Taylor admitted. That's the problem. He watched as Kevin returned to setting up computers for the children's program. 1 month ago, Taylor might have been the officer causing the problem. Today, he'd been part of the solution. It was a small step, but it felt significant. 3 months into the program, the police department's break room had become an uncomfortable place for Officer Taylor. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he could feel the stares from the small group of officers at the corner table. Here comes the poster boy, one muttered just loud enough to be heard. Taylor ignored the comment, though it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Since joining the reform committee, he'd become increasingly isolated among certain colleagues. They saw his willingness to acknowledge bias as a betrayal, a threat to their way of doing things. Taylor, a voice called from the doorway. It was Lieutenant Wilson, his direct supervisor. Got a minute? They walked to Wilson's office, where the lieutenant closed the door. How's the community program going? Wilson asked, taking a seat. It's going well. Making real progress with some of the residents. Even had a few apply to our youth cadet program. Wilson nodded slowly. That's good. But I'm hearing concerns from some of the officers about the policy changes you're proposing. Shifting resources from traffic enforcement to community policing, changing how we measure officer performance. Those changes are based on data, Taylor replied. The current metrics incentivize the wrong behaviors. When officers are evaluated on number of stops or citations, it creates exactly the kind of bias we're trying to eliminate. I understand that. But change takes time. You're pushing too hard, too fast. Taylor leaned forward. With all due respect, sir, the community has been waiting decades for change. How much longer should they wait? Wilson sighed. Look, I'm on your side. But there's talk about transferring you to desk duty. Some officers are saying they can't trust you to have their backs. Because I want accountability? Because you're challenging the whole system. Taylor felt a cold anger rising. The system needs challenging. Before Wilson could respond, his phone rang. After a brief conversation, he looked up at Taylor with a serious expression. There's a situation at East Side High School. Possible weapon on campus. All available units responding. Taylor stood immediately. I'm coming. You sure that's a good idea? Some of those officers aren't exactly your biggest fans right now. It's my community too, Taylor said firmly. 20 minutes later, Taylor arrived at the school to find several patrol cars already on scene. The school was on lockdown, with nervous parents gathering outside. He spotted Darnell in the crowd, trying to calm people down. What's happening? Taylor asked him. Someone reported seeing a student with a gun, Darnell explained. But something doesn't feel right. The way they're handling it. Taylor looked toward the school entrance where several officers had a young black student pinned to the ground. Even from a distance, Taylor could see they were using excessive force. That's Deshaun, Darnell said urgently. He's in the honor society. Works at the community garden on weekends. Without hesitation, Taylor rushed toward the scene, heart pounding. This was exactly the kind of situation where things could go terribly wrong, where unconscious bias could lead to tragedy. "What's going on here?" he demanded, approaching the officers. "Stay back, Taylor," one officer warned. "We've got this under control." But Taylor could see the fear in Deshawn's eyes, could hear the boy trying to explain himself through panicked breaths. This wasn't control. This was exactly what the reform program was meant to prevent. In that moment, Taylor faced a choice that would define not just his career, but the kind of person he had become. "Back off, now," Taylor commanded with an authority that surprised even himself. "Let him up." The officers hesitated, still pinning Deshawn to the ground. "I said let him up," Taylor repeated, stepping closer. "Where's the weapon?" "We haven't found it yet," one officer replied defensively. "But the call said." "So you have a student pinned down without any evidence?" Taylor's voice was steady but firm. "Get him up. Now." Reluctantly, the officers eased their hold on Deshawn, who sat up, breathing heavily, his school uniform disheveled. "Are you hurt?" Taylor asked, kneeling beside him. Deshawn shook his head, though his hands were trembling. "I didn't do anything. I was just going to the library." Taylor helped him to his feet as the school principal rushed over. "What's happening here?" she demanded. "Who called in this report?" "Ma'am, we received an anonymous tip about a student with a weapon," one of the officers explained. "Deshawn Williams? One of our top students?" The principal's disbelief was evident. "This is absurd." Taylor turned to the lead officer. "Was the caller identified? Did they provide any evidence besides a description?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Anonymous tip through dispatch. Said there was a black male student in a blue uniform jacket with a gun. That describes half the male student body," the principal pointed out angrily. "You can't just." She was interrupted by a commotion at the school entrance. Thomas Johnson was walking toward them, accompanied by Chief Henderson. "Federal Oversight Inspection," Thomas announced, showing his credentials. "We've been monitoring police response patterns to school incidents. What's the situation here?" The officers exchanged nervous glances as Taylor stepped forward. "Anonymous weapon report with vague description," he explained. "No weapon found. Officers detained a student without evidence." He glanced at Deshawn. "I intervened when I observed excessive force being used." Chief Henderson's expression darkened. "We've discussed this protocol repeatedly in recent training sessions. Anonymous tips require verification before detention, especially in schools." While the chief continued addressing the officers, Thomas pulled Taylor aside. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "It wasn't easy, standing against your own." Taylor watched as Darnell came over to check on Deshawn. 3 months ago, I might have been one of those officers. I would have justified it the same way they did. But you're not that officer anymore," Thomas pointed out. As the situation calmed, parents were allowed to enter the school and collect their children. Deshawn's mother arrived, her face tight with worry until she saw her son safe, then transforming to anger at what had happened. "Mrs. Williams," Taylor said, approaching her cautiously. "I want to apologize for how your son was treated today." She looked at him with suspicion. "You're with them, aren't you?" "The police?" "Yes, ma'am. But I'm also part of the community program with Mr. Washington." Taylor gestured toward Darnell. "What happened today was wrong, and I want you to know we're going to address it." She studied his face for a moment. Darnell mentioned an officer who was trying to make changes. "That's you?" Taylor nodded. "I'm trying." "Trying isn't always enough," she said firmly. "But it's somewhere to start." As Deshawn and his mother left, Taylor noticed several officers watching him with open hostility. His actions today had crossed a line in their eyes. Chief Henderson approached. "We need to talk about what happened here." "My office, first thing tomorrow." Taylor nodded, knowing that the real test of the department's commitment to change was just beginning. 6 months to the day after Officer Taylor had faced Thomas Johnson in court, they stood together on the steps of City Hall. Behind them, a crowd had gathered for the press conference: community members, police officers, local officials, and reporters with cameras ready. Chief Henderson approached the microphone. "Today marks an important milestone for our police department and our community. 6 months ago, we began a journey toward meaningful reform. It hasn't been easy. Change never is. But the results speak for themselves." He gestured to a display board showing statistics: complaints against officers down by 40%, community engagement up by 60%, arrest disparities reduced significantly. Officer Richard Taylor, the chief continued, will now say a few words about the program. Taylor stepped forward, acutely aware of the mixed audience before him. In the front row sat Darnell Washington, alongside Kevin and Deshawn. Several rows back, a group of officers watched with expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom and had to face an uncomfortable truth about myself, Taylor began. I had been enforcing the law differently based on zip codes and skin color. I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it. He paused, making eye contact with Thomas. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fixed. We have years of work ahead of us. But what I've learned through this program is that change is possible, both personal change and institutional change. Taylor gestured to a table where copies of a comprehensive reform policy were stacked. Today, our department is implementing new protocols and training requirements that will help ensure fair and equal treatment for all community members. These changes wouldn't have happened without Mr. Johnson's oversight and the willingness of community leaders like Mr. Washington to work with us rather than against us. From the crowd, a reporter called out, "Officer Taylor, do you regret your actions that day in court?" Taylor didn't hesitate. "I regret the years I spent enforcing the law with bias. But I don't regret being held accountable. That moment changed my life, and hopefully, it's helping to change our community for the better." As the press conference concluded, Thomas approached Taylor. "You've come a long way," he said, extending his hand. Taylor shook it firmly. "We've all got a long way to go. But at least now we're heading in the right direction." Behind them, officers and community members who once stood on opposite sides were beginning conversations, bridging a divide that had seemed insurmountable just 6 months before. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time in years, there was genuine hope for real change.